entitled The Signs of the Times in Luke 21, verses 25 to 36, within the framework of the theme, which is the promise of salvation, struggle for righteousness. Our text is this from Luke 21. There will be signs in the sun, the moon, and the stars, and on earth distress among nations, confused by the roaring of the sea and the waves. People will faint from fear and foreboding of what is coming upon the world, for the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then they will see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. Now when these things begin to take place, stand up and raise your heads, because your redemption is drawing near. Then he told them a parable. Look at the fig tree and all the trees. As soon as they sprout leaves, you can see for yourselves and know that summer is already near. So also when you see these things taking place, you know that the kingdom of God is near. Truly, I tell you, this generation will not pass away until all things have taken place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. Be on guard, so that your hearts are not weighed down with dissipation and drunkenness and the worries of this life, and that day does not catch you unexpectedly like a trap, for it will come upon all who live on the face of the whole earth. Be alert at all times, praying that you may have the strength to escape all these things that will take place and to stand before the Son of Man. I find this text very, very remarkable because it constitutes the highlight or the conclusion of an challenging missionary journey of Jesus, long missionary journey of Jesus in the Gospel of Luke. And the immediate context of this passage is the Eschatological Discourse, a speech about the end times, describing the parousia, or the event of Jesus Christ's second coming. It also marks the eschatological conclusion to a long historical missionary journey of Jesus from poverty-stricken and resistance-centered Galilee and its environs, beginning with Luke 9:56, going to the city of Jerusalem, ending in the city of Jerusalem, Luke 19:45, the center of political, economic, and religious power at the time. And in this missionary journey of Jesus, we find an intensification of contradictions that he experienced. And I would just like to highlight what's going to happen from Luke 19 to 20 to 21. When Jesus entered Jerusalem triumphantly, there was a division right away, a contradiction between the people who believed in him and those who wanted to trap him. And the people, the poor people, were saying, this is our Redeemer. And the disciples who didn't understand what was going on, together with the Pharisees who did not understand what was going on, he told Jesus, tell the people to keep quiet. And Jesus said, if I will tell them to keep quiet, should they keep quiet, the stones will cry out. And I have an exegesis on this already in one of the PCPR Promotion of Church People's Response gatherings. And then, as he was going to the Mount of Olives overlooking Jerusalem, Jesus wept because they did not know the terms of peace. They did not know the time of their visitation. Actually, Jesus was the terms that make for peace. And he was the one that was going to visit Jerusalem so that Jerusalem will reclaim its identity, Yerushalayim, which means comes from Ir Shalom, city of peace, or Shalom, the light of peace. And according to Psalm 122, Jerusalem is the city of peace or the light of peace because at the center of the city is the seat of justice. The seat of justice that make for peace. And Jesus is that seat of justice. He is the one visiting Jerusalem so that Jerusalem could reclaim its identity. But it is not going to. It cannot. It's going to be destroyed. And the first thing that Jesus did was to cleanse the temple. The moment he entered Jerusalem, the first thing that he entered into was the temple. And he reclaimed the temple to where it should belong, to God and to the people. But then in Luke 20, the authority of Jesus is questioned. So now we have another stage of conflict. This time, the authority of Jesus versus the authority of the powers of Jerusalem. And Jesus emphasized, Jesus reclaimed his absolute authority by the parable of the wicked tenants. And then the question about paying taxes, that we're going to trap him with regard to the state relationship. Is he going to obey the state? My take on this question about paying taxes, the answer of Jesus, give unto Caesar what is Caesar and to God what is God's. My take on that is I have reviewed the texts many times, including the other texts on paying taxes. I am convinced that Jesus and his disciples did not pay taxes to the empire and to the state. The question about the resurrection, this time the church went to the temple authorities. And of course, Jesus asserted his authority over the temple and the teaching. And that went into the question about David's son, the identity of Jesus himself, which allowed Jesus to denounce the scribes in that intensification of contradictions against his person, against what he stands for, against his cause and God. And then the intensification continues in Luke 21 to 1 to 4, challenging the scribes and the rich. The widow's offering was worth more than any other. And this clearly showed the side of that Jesus took. And then he foretold the destruction of the temple of Jerusalem because it was in the hands of the usurpers. And of course, now we go into the beginning of the signs and persecutions, the beginning of the higher form of contradiction. This time, the signs and persecutions coming into what you would call the eschatological signs and the historical persecutions side by side. And then the destruction of Jerusalem, the coming of the Son of Man, the lesson of the fig tree, the exhortation to be on guard. Verses 25 to 36 are all now the concentration of this, the height of this intense contradiction. And Jesus, at the end, he would say, he would be teaching at the temple by day, but Luke and Mark would never allow Jesus to sleep at night in Jerusalem. And that's the conclusion. He would teach at the temple by day, but he would always sleep outside of Jerusalem at night. And because if he would sleep in Jerusalem at night, he might be taken at any time. He was an undercover, he was an underground resistance leader. And therefore, he had to sleep at night outside of the city. That's why you have to be careful where you will sleep at night, in the city or in the mountains. And Luke 22, the plot to kill Jesus is now made operational. You go back to the historical part of the Lucan presentation. After that, eschatological portion, an interplay of eschatological imagery and historical description at the same time. Now we focus on the text. What does that mean? The reading the signs of the times in Luke 21, 25 to 36. First, it's what Luke is really describing is the parousia. And the parousia is a term given, or a description given to the king's visitation, or the emperor's visitation to his territories. Now, Jesus his second coming is also called parousia. He is going to visit now his own people again, and all of creation that was handed over to him by the Father, and to whom he belonged by virtue of his incarnation. So Jesus belonged to us. He also belongs to the Father, to heaven, but now he is coming back to reclaim us, to be his. But the parousia, as described, had this cosmic dimension of destruction and chaos. But the scholars, or I would think that that's really we should not take that literally, because it brings back to mind a typical apocalyptic literary style, for example, in Daniel, that would describe what would happen to the cosmos when something is happening in the history of humanity, in the history of the world, in the history of the human heart. The cosmic events show the difference between the first manifestation of Jesus in the incarnation, when he came and took our flesh. The world, the sun and the stars cooperated, and they were joyfully welcoming him, because he became part of us. And now in the second coming, he comes with all his glory and power over time and history in the world. And therefore there is a great disturbance in the cosmic world. And that contrast, the great disturbance of the cosmic world, is in contrast to his glory and power, and to the loving intervention, to the compassionate intervention of God's coming. So the compassion, the love and tenderness, and the power of this love and tenderness of Jesus contrasts with that cosmic disturbance. Now, on the part of the disciples, on our part, sometimes we are too disturbed by the signs of the times. Oh, what's happening there, killing there, and earthquake there. We tend to see those things and get disturbed by them. And then we miss the real revelation within that cosmic event, by the signs, that's the real revelation behind the signs of the times, to discover in these signs of the times the coming of Jesus as the final and definitive liberation of all creation. And this is eschatological hope. This is also our hope, which means, according to this Lucan verses, our attitude should be an eschatological attitude, not an attitude of worldly history of discouragement and neglect, or apathy and despair. in spite of what is going on. No, our attitude should be an eschatological attitude of vigilance and as active involvement in the struggle to establish the new heaven and the new earth. And that means we have to be with Jesus by day, teaching, proclaiming the alternative of the kingdom in the midst of destruction, in the midst of killings, and be with Jesus by night, in the safety of the night, in that serenity of the night where we can pray and gather our strength and be ready for the next day. Which means, in the concrete, what are the signs of the times in the Philippines today? The cosmic dimension, the signs and persecutions that create cosmic disturbance in the Philippines today. I would consider that as today we are witnessing in the Philippines the consolidation of the ruling class. They are using the elitist democracy through elitist election to consolidate their political and economic power. Can you imagine 4 families of plunderers, of human rights violators, of cheaters and killers and drug dealers and killers, consolidating together to hold on to power and make the Philippines and the people captive? They are the ones that's disturbing the cosmos. They continue to consolidate their elite political power through the use of the state security forces against the people and their movement for change. We have to look into this very carefully. They have organized the NTF-LCAC to against the counterinsurgency or against the communist insurgency. And they blame the communists as the obstacle to progress. But the communists are not holding state power in the Philippines. The communists are not the ones deciding the direction of the country. They are the ones, the elite political and economic power. The families are the ones holding the reins of power and government. And they are in power. They are in a decisive place, to chart the course of Philippine history. And yet they blame the communists who are not in the position of power in the Philippines. In fact, they were saying there are just very few now, New People's Army, and then they spend so much to defeat them. And then the consolidation of elite political and economic power through control of education, services, and mass media, the control of the cultural apparatus. For example, they are now burning and banning the books that were written because of the accounts of the peace talks or analysis of Philippine society, making us like horses of the Tanilla, horses of the Calesa, control of education, services as mass media, and the textbooks that did not write much about martial law, and the revision of Philippine history. These are the ones that disturb the cosmos of Philippine society. And now there is still another one, the role of the U.S. military-industrial complex, both here and in the Philippines, in the cosmos. Of course, you have the Mutual Defense Pact and Visiting Forces Agreement. And then we have this National Task Force to eliminate local communist armed conflict, which is actually designed or comes from the Pentagon's military counterinsurgency strategy, or COIN. I hope you will have a chance to go into the Pentagon, because we can actually download that. That I have downloaded that program, the COIN, counterinsurgency program, and the U.S. military aid to the Philippines and continuing human rights violations, empowering the Philippine state of the elitist Philippine state to oppress the people, and of course the China card. Until now, we should ask the question, until now, why has the US, in spite of this MDP and visiting forces agreement, have not come significantly, to help the Philippine state against China's incursion and occupation of Philippine territory? And now, the response of the people, the eschatological hope in the midst of despair and neglect. I would like to suggest that the large masses of the people today who are being co-opted, who are victims of revisionism, who think differently, that is still part of where we can find the eschatological hope. There is such a thing as the logic of the minority, that if the people will realize and will see the logic of the minority, that the minority actually is articulating the deepest desires of the majority, they will go to them. And that is why painstaking education and arousing and mobilizing the masses constitute the greatest task of proclaiming and clinging on to this eschatological hope in the midst of despair and neglect. Where to find God in Philippine society today? Where to find Jesus in Philippine society today? The eruption of God's extravagant love, of Jesus' self-sacrifice, can be found among the poor in their struggle for food and freedom, jobs and justice, home and honor, land and liberation. I included this home and honor because of Pope Francis' definition of basic human rights. Techo, home or roof; trabajo, work; and tierra, land. The poor and their struggle is the social conscience of society. They are our social conscience. Even if they do not struggle, the fact that they are impoverished, the fact that they are deprived, the fact that they're taken advantage of, they already constitute to us as our social conscience, as well as our personal individual consciences. And the defense, the defense that they have made for themselves, the new way of thinking and the new aspirations that are born in their defense, that is part of the social conscience. Therefore, another source of eschatological hope in our relationship with the Philippines, with our country while we're here, is solidarity, both domestic and international, to live as brothers and sisters. But not only with them, also here in the US with the 5 ethnic groups of Latinos, of Native Americans, of Africans, of Asians, and of the Europeans, victims of a system of a consolidated elitist power. We should continue to expand our solidarity ties with them and our home in the Philippines, with the people in the Philippines, because the poor here and everywhere, they constitute as the social conscience of society. And finally, friendship and social dialogue, the need for peace talks in the Philippines, And here in the US, advocacy not to block the peace talks, not to block the peace talks, and social dialogue here in the US, the need to dialogue with them, like the Philippine Human Rights Act, military aid, and any aid to the Philippines under the conditions of securing the human rights of the people of the Philippines and of elsewhere. Finally, the promise of salvation, struggle for righteousness. We need to continue our personal and social remolding, which can be very difficult when we're here in the US. And what can we do? We need to pray. We need fasting. Prayer here, incidentally, doesn't mean my personal prayer to God that I will become good and God will accept me, That kind of prayer, which is good, but in modern psychology, we look at it now as narcissistic prayer. Narcissism, Prayer is supposed to be an act of love. As an act of love, it is relational. It's prayer for the other rather than for me as the center of the universe and the center of salvation. I cannot be saved by my own self alone. That's narcissism. I can only be saved by love, by making the other as the center of my life. And fasting here means not just, not eating food but voluntarily depriving myself of the things that I need and I want for two reasons. So for three reasons. First, so that I would realize my own sense of being human and my need for God and for the other, my dependence on the other. Second, so that I would be able to share what I do not take. I will be able to share it to others as an act of justice. The third, solidarity with others. Fasting as an act of solidarity with others. And finally, good works. We need to continue. The fruit of our prayer for others, the fruit of our fasting should be seen in our good works. And I think we need to continue to explore the many good works that we could still do in the Philippines and here in the US among the poor, living out our eschatological hope in our time, making real our vigilance in our time, taking side with Jesus, with him by day and with him in the night. Thank you very much. And happy Advent to us all.